freedoms erode? Or what of our complex language? Is this also being used to trick us? And if so, why? Darren hints at a truth that must remain hidden. Where might God or the devil fit in? Do men control them too? I suppose humans could live together peacefully for everyone's benefit. Only joking. Darren runs a highly insightful website, which is all the W's, alternativeanswers.net. Well worth a visit. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Darren Dioki.
That's one of the best introductions I've ever had, actually, so I hope I can follow up on that. Thank you for such a considered and thought-out statement there. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. I've had a bit of a challenge presented to me tonight, and that is I've got to try and stand behind this podium. Now, I'm somebody who usually wanders about all over the place, those of you that have seen me before, so if you see me gripping onto this for dear life, it's to try and stop me from moving about too much. But I'll be using this whiteboard a lot, so I will be moving back and forth. I hope none of you get too dizzy. Can everybody hear me okay before I start? Yeah, people at the back nodding? Excellent. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the clear yes at the back there, John. Okay, so I chose tonight's title and the sort of leaning that I was going to give this talk based on what I saw was the other sort of talks that were going on at this particular New Horizons group. So I wanted to make it a bit kind of hard-hitting and challenging. How do people feel? Does anybody have anything like to say about what brought them here tonight and about what motivated them to turn up, or are you all just quite regulars here? Does anybody have anything they want to say?
We all came especially to see you.
Oh, thank you, Albert. I've got to give them a cheque for that later. Thank you. Okay, I've got a couple of things I want to say before I get into tonight's subject matter. So first of all, a bit about myself. Tonight we're going to be looking at one of my core subjects, which is about the power of language and how it's used to control and mislead us, but how it's done in a very, very obvious way, but it's staring us all right in our faces, which hopefully after tonight you'll get a sense of that. But it's not the only subject that I do. I do a lot of events which are a bit unusual. You know, you wouldn't normally come along to something like this to hear specifically about language and how it can help us in our emancipation, our empowerment and our freedom. But it's actually an essential thing for us to understand, just as I believe are the other subjects that I pay attention to, which are all things which are so fundamental to our everyday getting about in the world that we don't pay attention to how much power is in them. So I do work on sound, language, perception, gender, relationships, and social interaction. Now these are things that you all engage in every single day, often without even thinking about it. You take your ability to perceive, to hear, to speak, to interact as granted, and none of us actually really pay as much attention to those things as we should. Now tonight I'm going to go a little bit into it and hopefully give you some hints as to how much insight may lie through that door if you are willing to go through it. Now, the other thing I wanted to say was, isn't 2011 turning out to be quite amazing? Have people not found that? Yeah. I found the energies to be moving about this year to be quite unlike anything I have seen to date. Now I have seen manifestation happen in times which are staggering, things just appearing in people's lives. On the contrary as well, things just disappearing. And also, I think most importantly, is the way we are all being challenged. Where, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for you guys, but certainly most of the people I have encountered or who are in my life over recent months have been facing some pretty sharp challenges. But the theme seems to be the same through all of them. It doesn't matter what the challenge is, it seems to be a whittling process is taking place. We're being asked to drop that stuff that we know we shouldn't really still be carrying around. Has everybody kind of encountered that a little bit? And I think if we embrace that that's actually what's going on, that that's the question that's being asked, then we can actually face these obstacles quite easily simply by acting on our knowledge. And I think the other kind of message that goes hand in hand with that is, it's a bit of a grow-up message, I think, that's hitting humanity a bit, and each of us individually, where we're hanging on to our old habits, a bit like, young kids with their dummies, and we're holding on saying, no, it's mine, I'm going to keep a hold of it. And really the universe has been telling us for years often that we really need to be putting some of these things down. And I mean, only you will know about those things manifesting in your life, but I'm certainly seeing a few nods in the audience that show that other people are sharing that experience. Now, the reason that I mention that is because obviously loads of talks go on at things like New Horizons, festivals, all sorts of places about 2012. I mean, has everybody here been to a talk about 2012 at some point? Or have you heard about it in some way?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a single no in the house. Now, all this emphasis, all this future planning, all this thinking about what's going on then, I've seen quite a lot of people that are metaphorically sitting about with their boxes of popcorn waiting for the show to take place. And I think that's a massive mistake. Massive mistake, because the challenges that we're being presented with now are the ones which are deciding who we are aligning with, who we are converging with, and who we are diverging from. So some people we are meeting with and we're forming new networks, other people we're separating from, but it's all based on our choices. And we're all being asked to choose based on all the wonderful information and knowledge you get given every week at places like this. How much of it do you actually act on? Not all of it's very easy to act on. How much of it do you think you should act on? Some of it doesn't need to be acted on. But really I think we're in a position now where there's so much coming at us that it's almost a demand to choose. Because the choices we make this year and the actions we take this year are what will decide where we land when 2012 does come along. So I actually think between now and then is far, far, far more important than then. Because where you are then is going to be determined by what you do between now and then. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. But I think it's an incredible time to be alive. There's a lot of joy and peace and great things happening in many people's lives, despite all the increasing oppression that comes along. And I think that's also a product of people choosing well. You know, and I think most of you will have had a taste of that in some way as well, otherwise you probably wouldn't be at events like this. So, all of that aside, there's I've noticed, because I've been doing these talks for a lot of years now, and I've noticed that there are both benefits to this mass awakening that's taking place, but there's also a cost. There's a cost to so many of us becoming awakened and empowered and having realizations and all the rest of it. And that is that so many people want to talk about it, they want to get up and share with the world and all the rest of it, but then it makes it very difficult for each of us to filter through what we're presented with. There's a great kind of increasing sense of information overload taking place. You know, there's very few places you can turn now without being bombarded by a whole new area that you may not have heard of before, but you're basically being told, oh, did you know it's hitting the fan there as well? Oh, did you know there's something bad happening over here too? And it just keeps on stacking up. And I think rather than continuing to expose ourselves to all these messages of great overarching powers pressing down upon you, instead of that, I think we really need to be asking how much of it is relevant, how much of it is important. Because just because something is true, it doesn't mean it's relevant, and it doesn't mean it's important. And making that insightful choice, being able to look at it and say, is this really that important? Is this really going to help me on my journey? I mean, tonight we're going to be talking a lot about things which are pointless. And it's quite an interesting thing, because there's a lot of these things that we're hearing about these days that actually, they're great, they're information, they're true, but they don't really take us anywhere. They don't lead us anywhere. They just give us another piece of information to add to our in-tray. And hopefully tonight, what I'm choosing to share with you, so I'm much more selective in the talks that I give now, because I used to give a range of about 40 or 50 talks, but I've stripped it down now just to make it easier for people, because I want to use the very, very short period of time I have with you to talk about things which I feel are important and which are relevant, and not to waste your time with pointless things. So hopefully I will achieve that, so with the stated intention out of the way. So I just want to check, in terms of all this awareness stuff that's going on, I just want to see how much everybody had heard stuff about. So money scandal and money rip-offs and stuff like that. How many people have had some insight into that? There's something going on with the money system. Okay, there's a lot of hands going on in here. Okay, money system's one. What about government oppression, sort of an increasing criminalisation of the average member of the populace? Not as many hands for this one. Okay, because that's very subjective, isn't it? Very subjective. We'll look at a few of the symbols for that later. What about Codex Alimentarius and the chemicalisation of food?
Yeah.
That's quite a scary one, isn't it? Brilliant.
That's starting to bite now.
Sorry, it is starting to bite, that's absolutely true. Yeah. Chemtrails, anyone? Chemtrails? Yeah.
That's starting to bite as well.
Yeah. Free man and the sovereign movement, all about how laws are used to make us less than the state. Yeah, lots of hands going up. Vaccines and big pharma.
Yep.
Yeah. Fluoride and chlorine in the water to fry your brain. Brilliant. Okay.
Destroy your initiative.
Sorry?
Destroy your initiative.
Absolutely, yes. Alien cover-ups, alien interventions, all this sort of stuff, yeah. History rewrites, Masonic control.
Yeah.
What a list, isn't it? Now, for the number of people that stuck their hands up for every single one of those, what a busy head you must have. How much of that is swirling around in there? And, you know, you wander around the supermarket, terrified to buy anything because you don't know what's being done by Codex, terrified to speak to police because you're scared they're going to just try and get money at you, and we're just being made afraid of everything that we're turning around to face.
And we've got no fear.
Well, that's all right for people like Albert in his position of having no fear, but there are some who do feel fear in the face of it, and it's not fear that they're feeling, it's a sense of helplessness, or a bit of maybe even helplessness leading to hopelessness to an extent. And I think that's something we have to be very, very careful of as a side effect to all this awakening. Because how many times do you watch these films on the internet or whatever and you hear people saying, here's what they're going to do in a few years, RFID chip, in a few years this, in a few years that, in a few years this. Now, if you get millions of divinely mandated, incredible human beings to all think about all this stuff manifesting, all you've done is increase the odds of it.
Yeah.
So all you've done is increase the chances of it actually happening. And this is what I mean about choosing well what you choose to align with this year, because with all that manifestation magic that's happening around us, I would say 2011 is definitely the year to be very, very careful with both your spoken and your unspoken desires. Because from what I've seen, they can just pop right up there. So it's just a note of caution in what you do with this incredible mind that you have and these incredible emotions, and choose what you spend them on. And what we're going to do tonight is hopefully have a look at some stuff that can help you manage that boundary and stop yourself being affected by some of this stuff that's trying to pull at your attention. Okay, so obviously the stuff that I've mentioned are all big issues. There's talks going on about them every week across the country. There's lots of interest in them. Rooms are filled with people like yourselves coming along to find out more. But again, how relevant is it all and how important? You know, how much of it is actually going to lead us to where we want to be? Because how would you all feel if I told you that all of that stuff is the bottom rung of the ladder of control? It's just the most obvious. It's the physical. It's right in front of you. It's the final layer. All the other work has been done. Now, I invite you to consider that for a moment, because it's quite a bold statement that all this stuff is just the wrapping up of the package that's already been constructed over not just hundreds, but thousands of years. And it's just a smokescreen. So that as people become more mentally awakened, they are absolutely and utterly bombarded on all sides with distraction. So that you cannot get a grip of your mind to use it for what you can really do with it. Because all it takes is a few of us to learn that and master that, and it will be job done. But for the side you all really want to be on, rather than the side we all come and hear about all the time. So obviously, for those of you that have been looking at a lot of these subjects that I've already mentioned, they're all very complex, aren't they? There's a lot in them. Some of them have been getting formed over decades, some of them even longer. And as you turn, as you turn your attention to each of them, you can become lost in months of research. Has everybody noticed that? Yeah? Everybody here on the internet? How many? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, as we go through tonight, I'll be talking a lot more about language, but I invite you all to consider the fact that it's not a mistake that we call it the web. It's not an accident that it's called the net. And I bet you'd all like to think you're the Spider-Man, the spider and the fisherman. I'd be willing to place money on the other side of the coin. that by all of us spending all these hours on there, we are the fly, we are the fish. Because what used to happen was, people would come and meet and do things like this, but then they would have energy to then go and act. What happens today is, people go and vent on a forum. Ah, that's better, I feel better after that. Brilliant. I'm going to have a cup of tea. Thinking our work is done. All we've done is outletted all that energy that could have been channeled into some activity to bring about change. How many people read forum posts from a year ago? Nobody does. Anybody here sit and spend hours crafting forum posts to share your knowledge and wisdom with the world? I have in the past. I don't anymore. Because they disappear, like yesterday's news. So again, it's about choosing how you spend your time. Because I know one thing is for sure, I get lost on the internet quite easily. I can sometimes find myself sitting there and I find myself watching a good YouTube video, but then I spent 20 minutes reading inane, banal comments, and I've giggled away to myself, and then I'm like, oh, I've just spent half an hour reading rubbish. So it's just things like this. Time is definitely the precious commodity, I think, for this year. And so I just invite you all to choose what you do with your time. So anyway, all of this state stuff has come in to create a mental maze. One that we could run around in for years and years and years and think that we're freeing our mind. But we're not. We're just teaching it to run in circles, and what we do is, if you imagine that our reality has walls and a ceiling, all we're doing with all this freeing your mind stuff and getting all this new stuff is, we're making the walls bigger and the ceiling higher, but the walls are still there and the ceiling's still there. And tonight we're going to delve into having a look at the structure of those walls and the structure of that ceiling and how it actually works. And hopefully you'll all get a small insight into the fact that it's very complex, but it's very obvious as well. So all this state stuff, the state control has been obviously building up over many, many, many years. It's really, really gone gung-ho in the last sort of 1,000 years with states forming all over the globe to, on the positive side, provide service, create infrastructure and all the rest of it. On the negative side, to gradually affect control and a diminished responsibility in the populace, which is the state we're at today. People have such a sense of diminished responsibility that most of us in here will have had at least a few times in our life where we don't even know what we want to eat next. You know, we're going around, I don't know what I want, you know. Because our decision-making capacity has been so whittled away from us, because we've given all that authority to others to make those decisions for us, that we've forgotten how to make proper decisions. And it's a key thing. How many of us, you know, I'm certainly bad for it. I might faff around for ages before I make a decision on something. Because that sharpness, that acuity that is only developed with practice has been robbed of us. So anyway, the states come in and they've done all this great stuff by giving us all these comfy benefits and comfy services to lull us into a nice sense of security and to also de-skill us, so we no longer know how to provide food for ourselves, we no longer know how to deal with conflict resolution and things like that in our communities anymore, because that's all been, you know, farmed off. And, well, that's, you all know what the state's done. I thought I could sit and talk about that for ages, couldn't I? But I'm not going to. We're short on time tonight. So, the work of the state is interesting, but only as a smokescreen, because it was done on the back of some already even more incredible work achieved by the church. Now, if you go up against the state, the worst thing that can happen to you is, yeah, a few policemen might rough handle you, you might spend a bit of time inside, you might get a fine or two, something like that, but that's pretty much the worst. Back then, you didn't agree with the church, you were burned, you were tortured, your kids got waterboarded, your family got abused and ostracised. That's a lot more hardcore. A lot more. The work of the state was built on the back of a broken, spirited European humanity. They'd already had a lot of their spirit and their energy bashed out of them. The rest of the work was easy after that. So what we're going to look at tonight is how the church achieved what they did, why they did it, and how it actually works, because it really, really isn't obvious at all. And that's why I talk about the rest of the stuff being a smokescreen. So, where do we start with such a thing? Let me just check my notes, which were rapidly scribbled on the train on the way here. Okay. The church has pretty much got one focus, doesn't it? What's the focus about? What's it to teach you about?
Money.
Sorry?
Money.
Money. Okay. That's not the obvious, that's maybe something that came along later. But in the obvious, what was the church set up to teach people about?
Their truth.
Yeah.
Their truth instead of the truth.
That's very, very true. And they went about enforcing that by force, obviously. But it's all about this God, devil sort of idea, wasn't it? The whole thing about God and the devil, all the rest of it. Now there's an interesting thing. I used to do a talk, which is a variation on this one, called Searching for the God thing. Because really, this God thing, you know, it's supposed to be everywhere, isn't it? Isn't that what we're taught? Isn't God supposed to be in everything? Isn't it supposed to be everything? Yeah, I think the Western Church isn't the only one that's given that idea. That's kind of common around the world. But what's interesting is that you would think then that if this God thing was in everything and is everything, that it'd be pretty easy to find it. It'd be pretty easy to kind of commonly agree the fact. If you think about searches and journeys that human beings have gone on, there is no search that has had the resource, the energy, and the time put into it over the last few thousand years than the search for this God thing. Nothing has had the resource put into it. So, clearly there's something wrong, isn't there? Because otherwise we'd all be sitting here saying, yeah, God, everywhere. We would have had some kind of common agreement, but it's not there. So something's wrong, isn't it? So it can only be one of two things. Either we are rubbish at searching. We're just crap, we should just give up. We're looking for something that's in everything and is everything, can't find it, give up, go home. I don't think it's that. Because if you look at everything else that humans have turned their attention to and their resource to, they've done a pretty good job. Well, that's my opinion anyway, you may beg to differ, but I think we've done a pretty good job overall, that wherever we've directed our attention, we've managed to make some level of progress and have a level of common agreement. I mean, if you look at the whole spiritual, New Age, energy type movement, it's only been around, you know, not a very long period of time, but already there's common agreement between people even in a room like this. You'd think if we were looking for this God thing that was in everything and was everything, there'd be absolutely, everybody would have agreed by now. So I don't think it is that we are rubbish at searching. So that only leaves one other option. There is something wrong with what we're searching for. There's something wrong with our idea of what this God thing is. And that is the critical thing that was achieved by the church. Now, for you to understand that, we're going to have to do a little bit of backtracking and have a look at how words work before we can have a look at it. So, I talk about how we spell all our words because all our words are really spells. Now, what is a spell? A spell is a word or phrase of magical effect. Okay? So you might think, well, how are words that? Well, let me give you some examples. I'd like you all to cast your mind back to some time in your life when somebody said something horrible to you. Either in a relationship, or on the school ground, or in the family home. And I want you to think about how that made you feel, and how you reacted, and how it affected how you think about yourself from then on, how you treat others. Because I guarantee you right now, today, every single person in here is censoring themselves, attacking themselves, thinking less of themselves in terms of their value and their worth, all as a direct result of something said to them. I'm not seeing any vehement disagreements in the audience tonight. Now there we are, we're all these magical, incredible, autonomous, divinely mandated, multidimensional beings wandering about here, and just a few words can change the way you think about yourself, the way you treat yourself, the way you treat others, for minutes, days, weeks, decades. How much more magic do you want? How much more of a magical effect do you want? Now I want you to think about things which were said positively. You look really good today. I really appreciate what you just did. I'm so grateful for you being here. And how that makes you feel. Magical effect as well. However, I'll tell you what the issue is with the whole compliment thing. It's quite a funny thing. Because how many in this room, and be honest, how many of you dismiss compliments? How many of you are like, oh, don't be silly. Don't be silly. Oh, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Yeah? Because you will not allow yourself to feel that warm, good feeling of the positive magical spelling effect. It's all to do with our value and our worth. That we don't think we deserve to feel that good. How much more magic do you want? So all our words are magic. That's why they're spelled. Now, obviously, some spells are more powerful than others. The spell for chair, for example. It doesn't matter how worked up you get. You're never really going to do a lot of harm with the word chair, are you? Oh, chair! You chair! Do you really do much to say? However, what if we use words which refer to things which have substance or energy in their own right? Like love. Or hate. Now, obviously, I'm talking about how much I love cheese. That's not going to have a lot of oomph. But you think about when you are feeling love, when you are with a loved one, and you want to look at them and you share that feeling. That's totally different than talking about love and cheese, isn't it? Because we're aligning with something that has substance, that has a quality that can move through us. It feels good. For positive things like that, anyway. Now, this is where the great trick has taken place in the world of spelling. Now, we have to do a little bit more of a background to understand how big this goes. So we're going to have a little bit of a deeper look at words for a second. So, Buddha used to say that words were signposts. And he was absolutely right. It's a literal thing. So, I'm going to give you an example. Here is a pen, obviously. Now, if you're a human being, anywhere on this planet, an old one, an adult one anyway, or at least a young child, if I'm doing this, you're going to know I'm talking about a pen. Yeah? To the exclusion of everything else in the room. You're not going to think I'm talking about the chair, are you? Or the floor, or the curtains, or anything like that. You're going to know I'm talking about the pen. However, I don't have to point at it, do I? I can just say pen. And to the exclusion of everything else in your field of vision, you'll be drawn to the pen. If I was doing this and I was saying whiteboard, look at the whiteboard. You wouldn't be looking at the pen, would you? So the word is signposting you to the subject. So I don't even need to have a pen. And I can say pen. Don't you like those pens? Have you seen those big pens? Lovely, aren't they? And your mind is directed to what a pen is. You could be thinking about a marker, you could be thinking about a nice fountain pen, a big pen, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're directed to that idea that it's a pen. Now that's really easy when we're talking about physical things. Really easy. And if I don't know the word for a physical thing, as long as it's in the room, I can at least go, this thing, I don't know what it is, this thing here. So it's a sport thing, you can use a word or I can point. Yeah? However, when we move to the next substance after the physical, the emotional, the watery realm, and I want to talk about my feelings, and I want to point out my feelings to you, and I want to point out that I'm feeling happy or sad, where do I point? It's not here, is it? It's not in the room. Now, because the emotional is our second substance, the second body, we have a built-in support tool that can point out to you how I'm feeling. What is it? What can tell you whether I'm feeling happy or sad?
Expressions.
My facial expressions, absolutely. If I'm sitting, if I'm crying my eyes out and going on about, whatever, I'm talking about how happy I am or whatever, you get a sense of it by my facial expression. Similarly, if I'm sitting there with this look on my face, And you walk into the room, you might think, oh Darren, there might be something wrong, are you okay? And this is a really easy example to show how we use these signposts all the time. Because the most common answer people give is, what? How are you feeling? Are you alright? Are you alright? Are you alright tonight? How are you? What's the answer?
Fine.
I'm fine. Now, if you've got somebody sitting there with a face like this, you're pretty sure everything's not really fine, isn't it? But what we're doing is, we're signposting them away from our internal reality. Now, we're all very polite in Britain, and we respect that usually. So we'll be like, oh yeah, that's fine. You don't find well that they're not fine, but you accept that repointing, that misdirection that we all do. It's a respect thing. Now, if it's a loved one or somebody you know really well, you might not accept the misdirection. You might say, no, that's rubbish, there's clearly something wrong, I can see it. Come on, let's talk about it. And you can push past their efforts to mislead you. That's one example where we mislead all the time to control space. Now, that's all well and good. What's interesting though is what happens when we move to the next substance. The fiery substance, the substance of the mind. Now, if I want to talk about things which have only mental substance, they have no physical substance whatsoever, and they have no emotional substance whatsoever. Politics, morality, existentialism, philosophy. These things have no emotional substance unless we give it to them. But if I'm trying to point out what politics is to you, or philosophy, where do I point? And it doesn't matter whether I'm going like this, or whether I'm crying or laughing. Unless I'm using the right sequence of words in the right order, you won't see the point. You won't get the point. So actually, this signpost thing is something that's very, very real. So I want you all to think and reflect and consider times when you've been listening intently to somebody. And everything in front of you is actually, you're not paying attention to it, it's a little bit blurred. And you're going, I can see your point. Or, no, I don't really see where you're going with this. Has everybody done that at some point in their life? Yeah. Anybody not? Anybody not? Okay. That is a time when you are navigating spaces in these other bodies, the emotional and the mental body, because they have a totally different substance. If I want to point out where London is, I'm obviously going to do it physically. I'm an actor, it's a physical thing. But if I want to point out other things, it doesn't matter where I point physically, and we have to get our heads around that. So what's actually happening when you're looking into that near space is you're navigating the mental space that we all share. That's why we have terms like, where are you going with all of this? I have a different point of view. Oh yes, I can see your point. Oh, he's just stabbing in the dark, him. It's because those are all terms which refer to distance, direction, location. It's a space. Now, what's happening in this space, because that's what's when all this physical world's a bit blurry and you're like, yeah, I can see what you mean. You're navigating the space in what's called your pre-conscious. It's not the same as your subconscious. It's right here all the time. Now, I know your subconscious is, but you draw upon your pre-conscious all the time. I'll give you an example of how your pre-conscious works. So, right now, without even thinking about it, everybody in here knows exactly what it would feel like to maybe run their finger across this pen. You know roughly what temperature it might be, what it might feel like. Anybody not? Okay. You also know what it would feel like to run your tongue across this pen. Anybody not? Okay. How instant is that memory? Okay. Now, I want you all to imagine what it's like to lick a carpet. Anybody not know how that feels? How quickly did that come to you? When was the last time you licked a carpet? Now, obviously, some of those giggles are telling me about certain heavy nights that may have been a bit more recent than others. Other than those, generally for most of us, it was a very, very long time ago. But that was when we built up this pre-conscious bank that we use all the time. Close your eyes, everybody. And now open them. Okay. So, before you now, you see me, a man, you see a podium, you see a whiteboard, you see all the stuff behind me. How long did it take you to work out that was what you were looking at when you opened your eyes? It was pretty quick, wasn't it? It was pretty quick. But what if I told you that actually some time passed? It's just that it was so quick you may not have noticed. Just like the licking a carpet memory. Because what's interesting is that to know that I'm a man, and to know that this is a whiteboard, and all these things are curtains and floors and all the rest of it, that's a conclusion. That's a result. That's a response to something that you've picked up. Did everybody see that?
Yeah.
That it's actually the end of a process, not the beginning of one. To conclude that I am a man standing before you is a conclusion. It's the end of a process of, what is this that appears before me? And it's just that we do this all so quickly now, and that's where the preconscious lies. Now, when we're talking about all the light and all the energy of the universe being right before you, right here, right now, which is what is in every single spiritual text on the planet, what is it that's standing between you experiencing that? It's in that space. In that space, before those interpretations take place. Because that's when we're in our state of our raw perception. And that's where our real power and our real awareness and our real presence lie, is right in those fractionary moments. Okay, so back to the words thing and all the rest of it. So all these words are signposts, they're all pointing. So in terms of the spells and the spelling, what's happening is I'm casting these spells up into space, and you are assembling them all to see if you can get the point. Now, getting the point, we have another word for that, and that word is meaning. Okay? And really, everything that we're doing is a search for meaning, isn't it? Everything is about, what does it all mean? Why am I here? What's all this? But can anybody here tell me what meaning is? It's one of those words, isn't it? You all know what it is, but try to tell somebody about it, it's very, very difficult. So, I'll make it easier for you. If I draw on this board now, pen run away, all these sort of signposts that are being chucked up into this mental, emotional and physical space that we are surrounded by, and if we say that this was the point, yeah? To understand what meaning is, I want you to think about maths. What is the mean in maths? It's the average. It's the average. So what you're doing when you're trying to follow my point is you are trying to assemble the average of all these spells. Yeah, I can see some minds starting to sweat in the audience now. This is it, because this is it. What the journey we're on is one of mental awakening, and it's one of being able to see what is happening mentally. We can all see what's happening physically. The last 100 years or so has given us a greater sense of what's happening in us emotionally, but the thing that's fallen behind and the thing that's often left out is obviously the mind. So what's happening is we're casting all these spells, but we're all following these signposts every day. And if you can get the point, then you'll arrive at the position of understanding. Aha! A little aha moment. I see what you're talking about. And then you can maybe then go and point it out to somebody else. Now, the thing is though, these signposts can be mispointed. They're like vandals who might vandalise one of the road signs out in the street. And we're tricked by signposts every single day. And there's many ways. It's what I call the art of spelling. And if you want to understand about true masonry and true sacred geometry and all this sort of thing, the heart of it is actually in these. Oops. I did it the wrong way around, didn't I? I didn't catch them in lowercase. A, B, things like that. All this awakening in recent years of, this hunger for symbol cracking and code breaking and delving into ancient tablets and scrolls, looking for some kind of enlightenment or some kind of liberation. It's nonsense. Because triangles and squiggles on a 5,000-year-old tablet have no effect on you. They're not standing in the way of you and your emancipation and your enlightenment. It's just triangles and squiggles on a tablet. But these do have an effect on you. These do misdirect you and mislead you. And this is where our mental emancipation and liberation comes from, is understanding these symbols. And we'll get into that in a bit more detail later on. But first of all, we need to get this background stuff out of the way. So, I'll give you an example of how signposts are mispointed. So earlier on, when I was talking about government oppression, yeah, and the enslavement of humanity and things like that, you may have a few speakers coming here talking about that sort of stuff, and they may be talking about it from a police military state point of view, or from an Illuminati point of view, or things like that. Has everybody here heard talks along those lines? Yeah? Okay, but I actually was interested because when I said the government oppression thing, not that many hands came up. Because there are many very intelligent, very well-read, insightful, intuitive people who, they're a bit wary about committing to this whole idea of a big overarching conspiracy. They're a bit like, that could be the case, but, that's a bit far-fetched, or that's a bit grand, isn't it? Why would anybody want to do that? And it's because they don't think it's obvious. But now I want you to think about I'm going to invite you to look at some symbols that we face every single day that show this is endemic. Okay, and actually a sense of an enslavement of humanity is actually pretty much a fact based on these symbols. So I'm going to draw something on the board. Some of you may have seen this before, so if you know the answers, let somebody else answer. Okay, very, very quick drawing. Give me a moment. Okay. Does everybody recognise that picture? You've seen it somewhere, haven't you? Okay. Yeah, my art skills haven't improved in 7 years doing these. Okay, can somebody tell me what this is called, please? This part here.
Collar.
It's a collar, thank you. What's this part called?
Cuff.
The cuffs. And this part here?
Tie.
It's a tie. You've been tricked by context. Made of fabric. We love them. The nicer somebody's collar, cuffs and tie are, the higher up they are. We admire people who are maybe wearing their flash bling suits and whatnot. I'm sorry, what if they were made of metal? Would you look at them differently? Who wears collars, cuffs and a tie?
Slaves.
Slaves, prisoners, servants. Whichever way you want to look at it. We have different grades of collar. Blue collar, white collar, dog collar. Every single policeman in this country is known by his collar number. I'm not making this up. This is the point about the work that I do is, I'm not making any of it up. All I'm doing is showing you what is staring you in the face, and I'm saying, come to your own conclusion. But these are not accidental symbols. They're not accidental names. Draw from it what you will. But what I invite you to consider is, this is one of the surface ones. This is one of the really, really easy ones. And it's been staring you in your face your whole life, and you never spotted the correlation. And as a beginner, as a beginning item, I invite you to consider that there are thousands of such examples that show us the real state of play. Because we're so cocky, and we're so confident, and we're so blasé with our use of words that we don't even look at what we're saying. Okay? Another one, just to give you an example of... So there's 4 ways the art of spelling is abused by those in control to trick you. That's why they're laughing about all this codex banking, all the rest of it, because it's like, ha ha ha, they're playing the game. Great. But if you're playing the game, you're never going to win it, because it's their game. Okay? So let me get rid of this for a second. The stuff I'm talking about tonight is about how you rise above the game and then you laugh at the game because it's all obvious. Okay, another one. There's a word that's over a lot of corporate establishments, shall we say. When we walk through the door, we're presented with lots of images of satisfaction, fulfillment, sexual allure, attractability, all these things. We were taught that word means way in. And I'm going to write the word on the board and I'm going to ask you to tell me what it says. What does that say? It says entrance.
Trance.
This is where you are tricked by emphasis. Because you say entrance, as if that was an I. There's no such word. This has only ever meant one thing. Now, apparently, etymologists, if there's any in the room, I'm going to talk about etymology in a bit because it's fun, but it's virtually irrelevant. It's part of the maze that we get lost in. Oops, I need to write that down and then talk about that. Let me just write up here. Oh, Lord. Hopefully nobody can see it, it's just for me. Okay. Entrance. Think about what happens in those establishments. The next time you're wandering around one of those supermarkets, stop and just watch. Watch yourself if you like. The music's on the right. Oh yeah, you get one through. Oh, I only came in for a pint of milk, but isn't this good? Oh, brilliant, yeah. And we're all entranced. Shiny lights shining down to highlight these promises that don't last. That's why you have to go back next week. But as we've been learning through some of this stuff, that list I mentioned at the beginning, you know, people are learning that actually, even the food that's in there, it's not even food anymore. You got a lovely picture of a cheesecake on the front. Have you ever turned over and read the back? Has anybody seen the words cheese or cake in there at all? Because they're not there. And this is the whole codex. It's not just about codex, it's about understanding food derivatives and how they actually piece together bits of different food to give the appearance of food. So it wobbles like cheesecake, it looks like cheesecake, it might even taste a little bit like cheesecake. But the nutritional value and the life force in that is nothing in it. That's why you'll be hungry 20 minutes later. Because there's no food value there. But that's just one example, I don't need to digress on that. But that is the point of entrance. And it's yet another, just a single example. Staring you in the face your whole life. And again, these are the easy ones. These are the surface ones. Okay? So the whole art of spelling is very, very significant because this is about us being able to look at what our mind is doing and how it's been tricked. Because with the ever-growing, increasing sense of unity and knowing and connectedness that you are all having, there's one bit that gets left on the outside. It's the mind. So people are having ever-increasing feelings of unity, connectedness, spiritual experience. And then we return to our everyday awareness and we can't really talk about it. We may be able to say, oh, I felt dead in tune, I was connected to everything, it was great. Or, yeah, it was all at one, it was wonderful. But our capacity to point out things in our spiritual reality is abysmally poor. Because we don't understand how to use our own language. Now, the thing is, if we cannot coherently agree on our spiritual reality and our energetic truths, then we'll never be able to unite. How many types of energy healing are there out there? Quantum healing, fluid healing, Z-point healing, G-point healing, whatever else. Aren't we all talking about the same thing? And everybody's inventing their own terminologies to point out these things. And, you know, you'll have conversations amongst groups like this, and there'll be this quiet, knowing nods. It's like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. We're talking about the same thing. But unless we can share that coherently, divided we fall. It's that easy. How can we possibly manifest some kind of cohesive spiritual reality to match the internal experience that we're having if we can't connect and share that? The mind will still be sitting on the outside. Now, the reason the mind is sitting on the outside is because all of our blooming signposts are pointing in the wrong place. I'll do questions at the end if that's okay. Yeah, because all of our signposts are pointing in the wrong place. So that's why it doesn't fit. That's why you can go on a retreat or something like that, or go and do whatever, have this lovely experience, and then the next day when you're walking down the street, your mind's back to its old tricks again. Judging you, judging others, criticising yourself, all the rest of it. It's like, what's that all about? There you were, you had a blissful experience and you thought that was it, job done or whatever, and then woof, back comes the mind into full action. Okay, so that's just a bit of a glimpse as to the whole thing of how these words work. So, when we talk about freeing the mind, and when we talk about the concept of mental emancipation, or what I call mental healing, because this is what it is, it's actually mental healing, all this stuff is mental healing. as I said at the beginning, what people consider to be freeing the mind is this broadening of the walls and the lifting of the lid of reality, but it's still walls and it's still a lid. Because of these, because of the power and the awareness that we've locked into these ideas and these concepts and these signposts. So these, words like this, are the bricks and the mortar of your reality. Because if you don't have a word for a concept, it ain't in it. It ain't in your mental framework. So anybody here heard of M. Scott Peck? M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Travelled. Yeah? Fabulous, fabulous book by a psychiatrist on love. So that seems like a bit of a contradiction, but it's an absolutely beautiful book about human love, which I highly recommend to anybody. But in his second book, The People of the Lie, which is about human evil, he talks about coming to terms with something. And he says, well, to come to terms with something is to come to the name. Because the term for it is the name. So when you're a teenager, or if you have a teenager, and somebody asks you, or you're asking them how they feel, you go, don't know. Because we haven't come to terms with how we feel. We can't point it out to somebody else because we don't know. We don't have a name for it. We haven't come to terms. So it's not in our framework to be able to share. And we can't heal until that sharing takes place. Well, we can, but obviously it's a very insular process then. But anyway, I hope I'm getting the point across here that really, if we want to free the mind, what we have to learn to do is to deconstruct these limiting ideas and concepts. Because then you're left with all this raw material that's pure mind stuff that you can then reuse for other things, like creating a shared reference to this incredible energy and reality that we have an increasing awakening to. Okay, so the four most powerful spells in our language are, I'm going to leave that little word up there actually. Okay. Four most powerful spells. I'm going to hide them from you. Alright. Nobody gets a pick. No peeking. Okay. Everybody read them. God, devil, good, evil. Okay? These are the four most powerful spells in our language. No four words have been used to control behaviour, to control belief, and to control direction than these four. It's incredible what's been achieved with these four words. A duality presented as a reality. Not something we really want to spend much time in. So we're going to be looking at these four spells tonight in a lot more detail. Let me just see here. Okay, but before we get into the ins and outs of all of this, I want to talk about Masonry for a second. And the idea of, because everybody here's heard of the Masons, the Freemasons, haven't they? 5 minutes to break. Yeah. Oh, is it 5 to 9 already? Okay, that's actually perfect timing because I've got the word break after this bit, so that's ideal. What do you think? Right, so let's go back to this idea of this God thing then, this thing that's here. And this search that humanity is engaged upon for it since we were given all these concepts. Now, if we were to maybe do a search or a research, so research means to search again. Okay? So research is to search. So if we were to search again for this God thing, where would you look? Because it'd be pretty simple if we've, these things we've identified so far that, it's in everything and it is everything. It should be pretty easy for us to look for it, shouldn't it? No? Yes, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. It actually is. Very, very easy. But it's all because of this mispointing of this signpost. The signpost has been so abused and so mispointed that it doesn't point to everything anymore. But it should be pointing to everything, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It points to an archetype. Usually a personified archetype, usually with human qualities. But if we're talking about something that is everything and that is in everything, where is the humanity in a volcano exploding? Where is the kind of personality quality in waves moving across the sea? Or in nebula forming? It's not human. But what we do is we form archetypes to make things easier for us to understand. We personify that which we can't understand, and we're not aware that it misleads us. It's misled us. It served a purpose up until now, but as humans are becoming more mentally awakened, they need an intelligent connection with the divine, rather than one that they just must obey. And this is why there's been a large move away from traditional devotee religion. Now, what's interesting is that all of this, the fact that this is not the correct signpost for everything, isn't news. Because obviously, God isn't God in every language, is it? It's a name. It's always capitalised. It's a name. And it's a name that varies between languages. So, you know, in the Czech Republic, it's both. In Germany, Gott. In wherever else, it's whatever else. You know, Allah, Buddha, Vishnu, Brahma, whatever. But they're all signposts to the same sort of general concept. But they're all names. They're all names for archetypes, every one of them. Now, this has been well known about in Masonic circles. Now, Masonry for the last 300 years, it has been the little boys' club. It's actually a lot of rubbish compared to what it used to be, which was when it had some really clever people on board. Now, it used to be that there were, in the ancient Scottish Rite, 33 degrees. Degrees of awareness is what it's about. Now, as you went up through each degree, you would be given, as part of the ritual, the ceremony that took place, a word of power. Because they knew about spells. The words of power now have actually fallen out of the ritual almost altogether. It's been dismissed as a silly thing. Because they really don't have a clue these days, because all the work was already done. This lot of Masons are as duped as everybody else, most of the time. Because their minds are as trapped. But they knew about it. Because actually it used to be that the word of the highest initiation was the original, the first, and the universal name for God. And it was kept as the highest degree because they called it the Grand Omnific Word. It was meant to be the word that Solomon had, that David had, that Jesus had. It was meant to be, this was meant to be the Word. But the problem was, the Word was powerful and it can be used to liberate. And if you try to control people, you really don't want them liberated, do you? So actually, a choice was made. Now, you can go and research this yourself. Now, whether the choice was made by Masonic circles or by Jewish circles, I've not been able to pinpoint. There seems to be a bit of a crossover there, way back. But it was decided that the word was too powerful to share and too powerful to write down. And over time, they gradually started to omit certain characters. So there's a very famous old philosophical text. It's the only text I've found it in, but I have heard it's in other texts, and that is that Heidegger's Being in Time. Has anybody come across it? I'll just do one more second. In Heidegger's Being in Time, they would actually write the word for God either like this or with dash dash dash, because it wouldn't be written down. And over time, they lost it. It became known as the lost word. And you can go and have a look about the lost word. In fact, what's his name's book? What's his name? Da Vinci Code guy. Yeah, Dan Brown's latest book, The Lost Symbol, is actually a play-off of the fact of the lost word, which is actually a genuine Masonic myth and legend, which was that, the grand word of everything has been lost. So I need to leave that up until after the break. But, just before we break up, how do you lose a word? It's not like you're shopping at Asda that you just leave there. How did you lose a word? Where do you put it? Where did you put that word? Oh, I don't know. There's only two ways you can lose a word. Well, there's one way really, and it has different effects. And you lose a word by changing its reference. You make it point to something else. And by changing its reference, you change its reverence. And reference and reverence are directly related. So what's happened to this original grand omnific word? that's been lost? Is it something you don't know? Not at all. And we'll find out in the second part what it is, why you know it, and why it is the original word. So thank you all very much for your attention, and we'll see you very soon. Have a nice day. Okay, is everybody following the point so far? Has everybody got the various threads, yeah? Each of the subjects I've touched upon tonight about how words work, power of spelling, the art of spelling, all of this, these are all massive subjects in their own right. You can spend years...
You press the mic up? I
don't even know. Let's have a look. No. Just shows you that I'm bloody loud anyway. There we go. Is that better? Does it make a difference to you? Yeah. Okay. It took you to stand up and say something though. I forgot we were up to. What was I saying there? Anybody?
Are we up to it? Do we know what's...
Yeah, everybody got the point?
Yeah.
That sort of thing? Yeah, okay, yeah. Each of the subjects I've touched upon is actually a massive subject in its own right that you can spend years studying. The reason I'm rushing through them is because I've got another point I'm trying to make tonight, but I invite you all to consider each of the things that I've been discussing tonight in your own life, because each of them can genuinely lead you along the path of what I call mental healing, which is about integrating our mind with the rest of our healing experience. Most people now have got a great insight into what's good for the body and what's not. There's a great attentiveness to bodily health these days. The last 50 years or so has seen a great increase in the recognition of the need for emotional health and the fact that emotional dis-ease or discomfort can lead to many other problems, addictions, indulgences and all the rest of it. And in fact, emotional therapies have gained much, much more credibility. But it's still the mind that stands on the outside, and so now is the time for that to sort of come into our attention, because it's the missing piece of the puzzle. So, to return to tonight's subject, which is now, so when we finished off, we were talking about the lost word, weren't we? Which was this grand, omnific word of masonry. Now, the Bible's full of lots of stories. It was written by lots of people. Some of it's very, very, very good. Some of it's very, very misleading. And I think that's the easiest way to trick people, is to give them a certain amount of truth and then a little bit of fiction. Just to lead them off at the end there. A little partial signposting in the right direction so people can get some of the feel-good, some of the benefits, some of the things that an alignment with this God thing may benefit. I mean, if you remember at the beginning I was talking about, or near the start, I was talking about the difference between, say, using the word chair and being able to align with something with substance, like love. What do you think the benefits or the effects may be of actually being able to align with everything at the same time, which is indeed what this God thing would be? You would think it would be pretty good, wouldn't you? Quite nice. It'd be exactly what was promised. Now, how the church managed to go about this is through a different type of changing of the signpost. I was just trying to think about how we're going to approach this here, because there's a lot of ways we can talk about this. And so we talked earlier about the mispointing of certain signposts to be emphasis being one, context being another, but there's another one which is outright spelling mistake. An outright spelling mistake is a really easy way to mispoint a signpost. You imagine you were trying to get to Bath, yeah? You'd heard stuff about architecture, you'd heard stuff about nice things going on in Bath. But just say somebody changed that signpost to Wath. So you find yourself in this little backwater in Yorkshire going, there's all the bloody architecture, there's all the nice things. And this is exactly what's happened to people who have followed this God signpost, because it's been mispointed. Now, in amongst all these stories in the Bible, there's one key point that helps us get to the result here. And it's probably the most quoted verse in the Bible. John 1:1, I think it is, or John 3:1. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Everybody here has heard that before, haven't they? It's not news yet. Pretty often quoted, isn't it? Yeah. But it's all very metaphorical and allegorical and all the rest of it. But what if it isn't? What if it's quite literal? So what I'm going to suggest to you tonight is that that phrase is actually referring to the lost word. And then what it's doing is, it's referring to the first word. The first word that humans ever had. Now that's a bit of a mind bender, because you look at the number of languages we have now, you look at the number of subjects within a language that we have, there's lots, isn't there? We are a long, long way from our very, very, very first word. It far predates the Bible, it far predates writing. And actually what I'm suggesting to you tonight is actually, it was a statement of human camaraderie. Because what was it this Jesus guy was meant to be going on about again? Loving your neighbour as yourself, nice simple messages like that. We're all one sort of thing, that sort of hidden message there. And this is actually what the first word is about. Because it doesn't matter what language you speak now, it doesn't matter how you look, it doesn't matter how you treat your family, it doesn't matter anything like that, when our camaraderie can be recognised by our shared first word. I'll get into the significance of that as we go along. But before I do, I just want to invite you to think about the fact that the biggest barrier to human integration today isn't any of the stuff that you hear about in talks like this. The biggest barrier to human unity is communication. Because at the moment, every single subject, every single concept, every single idea, including this one, needs translated. And what that means is, as a species, we agree on nothing. Nothing. Not one thing do we collectively agree on. And I think the message is clear that divided we fall. If anybody's seen the UN trying to make a decision, it takes them 3 weeks to work out who's having what in their tea. Because it all has to be translated. And you can have the best orator on the planet, the best diplomat, the best speaker, whatever, but it doesn't matter if he's got a crap translator. The point can be completely missed because of this process of translation we have to go through. But if we can find something that we can agree on, then that is a foundation. It's an anchor point that we've got to fall back on to then try and resolve the rest of our differences. And this is the significance of the first word in relation to human unity as well. It's massively significant. And the gospel shall be preached throughout the world, which is all about a spell. It's all about this spell. Because that's the one they tried to preach throughout the world. That's the one they took to every corner, every part of the globe, right into the deepest parts of the rainforest, to the Aborigines in Australia. All of them, other than the recently discovered tribes, have heard about this guy because of missionaries. The church went to town. They didn't go to town. They went to the globe. They went all round to spread this message. But it was all enforced in a different language. It was about making people adopt somebody else's name for something. It wasn't the word. Now, how on earth is anybody going to know what the first word is? In fact, up until very recently, any linguists who were searching for funding to go and look for the first word were actually told there was an almost global policy in universities to say, you can't look for that, no funding available for that, no funding for the first word, sorry, forget it. I think it was intentional. But on the kind of benefit of the doubt side of things, I think philosophically it's a very difficult question for traditional linguists to answer, because they're looking at it from the point of view of, well, we've got these tablets, and we've got this, and we've got that. How are we going to recognise the first word? How would we know which one was first? And then, obviously, the first word is going to predate writing. So, how are we going to know it? And this is where this concept of it becoming lost came from. However, the answer is much, much easier than that. Because language, one of the big questions that linguists ask is, is language innate? Innate means, are we born with the capacity to make language? I think the evidence says that, yes, it's pretty innate. But even if it isn't innate, then the capacity to make sound is innate. Because the first thing a baby does to get its attention is do what? And it gets all its needs met just by doing that. Pretty good going. Shame it doesn't work for me now. Anyway. But what I'm going to do to make this easier for you all to grasp is that, we're quite lucky that we're not the only species on the planet. But we're part of a particular group of species. We're mammals, aren't we? And we come into the world in the same way that other mammals do. Sperm and egg get together, there's a womb involved. Next thing you know, a few months pass, and a mammal is born. Now, there's a really interesting thing about mammals, and that is that if there was a mammal on the other side of that wall right now, making its noise, every one of you would be able to recognise it. Anybody disagree? Okay. Now, it wouldn't matter if it was a Shire horse, it wouldn't matter if it was a Chinese horse, it wouldn't matter if it was a Pinto, a Shetland, whatever. You'd recognise it by its noise. Wouldn't matter if it was a black sheep, a blue sheep, whatever. The noise would give it away. Same with species of dogs, other than those which have been bred and are specially variants within that. So the question that I suggest to you tonight is, are we any different? Are we any different? I don't think we are. Now, as a human being out there, yes, we can recognise them, but it doesn't make any sense to us if they're from another country and they speak a different language or something like that. But it's not a core sound. There's not a core recognisable sound. So let me extend the analogy for you. Let's think about a sheep. So, if there's a sheep there and it's saying to its friend, I'm going over there today, it's going to say something like, meh. If the sheep says, oh, isn't the weather nice? Meh. Oh, it's a bit chilly today. Meh. All variations on the same core sound that they use to refer to anything or everything. Perhaps even a first word of their own. Because I want you to think about it, and again, are we any different? I don't think we are. Now, if you think about that sheep again, it's using this sound and it's pointing it at all these subjects, and all the other sheep seem to know what's going on. It doesn't seem to need translated, it doesn't seem to need training. They all seem to get it. So what on earth happened to us? Now, what's an interesting thing is, if you imagine the very, very, very first word that humans had, before we had language, before we had emotional intelligence, while we were still thumping rocks against each other and running about with hair roughly my length, possibly longer. Now, back then, if we had that core sound, and we're using it, and it can refer to everything, isn't that what this was meant to do? Isn't that what this signpost was supposed to do? Point to everything at the same time. And I'm suggesting to you again, no, we're not any different. So the question is, what's the word? I always hate this bit because I'm never quite sure how to jump into it. It's like you get to a point where it's like we're just going to say the word and that's it. So what I'm going to say is, I'm going to invite you to consider the fact that this, God, devil, good, evil, is a polarity puzzle. And it's extremely clever. It's good work. And this is where I think the whole collar cuff tie thing and things like that I do, I say that to a lot of people in this whole free man movement and to a lot of other groups, because I think a big thing is missing in a lot of the arising and awakening movement, and that is respect. And it is respect for the fact that it is a bloody smart system that's been put in place, and that it had you. You were tricked, and they got you. And I, even though I'm now emerging from that, I respect that fact. I respect the fact that it's that I'm up against somebody who knows what they're on about. I mean, I'll tell you something now. The events I do on gender, I mean, you never get events about gender, do you? It's very few, very, very rare. It's another very neglected subject. That's intentional too. That's why we've had a breakdown in community, a breakdown in relationships in the last 40 or 50 years. People don't know what it is to be in a relationship for their whole life anymore. Certainly people who have been together for a long time through that have managed to maintain it, but certainly new relationships really struggle. And it's because that we have been turned away from the subject of gender and how much power and awareness is locked in it. But I'll tell you what, somebody knows about cosmic gender, because otherwise they wouldn't know that you only had to tie the men. And it's only the men that are tied for a reason to do with gender. So that's again just a little indication that you've got to have respect. So this deserves respect as well. This is a duality puzzle. So we're presented with God and devil as polar opposites, aren't we? But then it's like, I remember as a kid saying, well, but didn't God make the devil? And so doesn't it mean that he's lower? How can he be here? What's this all about? These scales don't seem to balance in my mind. You never get a proper answer, do you? Now, that's because the trick has to be maintained. Yeah? What they've actually done is, instead of elevating devil to the status of God, they've relegated God to the status of devil, which is a bit of a tricky concept there. But actually, this is all about spelling, because people are looking for a unity, aren't they? They're looking for a way out of duality. They're looking for some third factor, some third element. But actually there isn't one. Because the journey we're on isn't to some new, undiscovered state. It's a return to a state of awareness that we already had. But it's to integrate it with this body awareness that we have now. Okay? One of the greatest tricks the church ever achieved was to make people believe that their soul was on holiday when they were living. And that you'd have to wait until you died before you could pick it back up again. What a great way to switch people off. Now, the thing is, if you all accept the fact that you have a soul or some form of awareness before life and after life, then you have what I call the choice of no abstentions. The choice of no abstention means that you choose. Whether you realise you made a choice or not, you choose. And the choice for your reunion with your soul is you either wait for death and you pick it up then, or you tread the path of return, which is to tread the way back along these emotional and mental pathways that have been presented to us to the closest last time you were near that awareness, which is when you first picked up this body. Infancy. Birth. Just for a moment, let's have a look at some infant qualities before we get back to the puzzle for a second. Okay, so I'm a baby, I've been born. Sorry camera people, I'm going to have to make you move here. So every one of us, when we're born, we arrive in the world and we're like this. Yeah? We're kicking, we're lashing, we're crying, we're defecating freely. We have absolutely no body awareness. We haven't got a clue what our body's doing. It takes us a year to get it just to walk. A couple of years to make it talk. And you did that just with the power of your observation. And I really invite you to think about that because it's bloody incredible. But let's look at some infant qualities here. How many parents do we have in the room? Uncles, aunts. Okay, so everybody has had some contact with an infant at some point. Would you say that infants are very accepting? Of course they are. Because you can have a human being born anywhere in the world and they'll be like, cool, I'll get on with it. Are infants very loving?
Yeah.
They love pretty much everything, don't they? Yeah. Are they very forgiving? Yeah, they don't hold a grudge, do they? We have to learn that later. And there's an interesting thing about infants, and that is that they don't really start to focus on things for a while, do they? It takes them a while to actually zone in and see what people are looking at. Up until then, they're like this. Not quite as stupefied as I look there, but the eyes are open, yeah. Now, what's interesting is that modern science will tell you that they're not perceiving anything there, they're not picking up on it. But actually, the opposite is true. They're perceiving everything. They have a state of what's called undifferentiated awareness, where they can't tell the difference between things. The reason it takes them so long to focus is because it takes them a while to filter out everything else. To say, what is it Mum and Dad are pointing at? Some bloody fluffy toy, is this what it was about? Okay. Must be important to Mum and Dad. So they're perceiving everything. So let's have a look at some of those qualities. All loving, all accepting, all forgiving, all perceiving. I'm sorry, what qualities are these? Who do we attribute these qualities to? There's only one thing we attribute those qualities to, and that is the divine. The divine. Every single one of you, bar none, exhibited those qualities. You had no body awareness, but you were oozing soul awareness. That's why babies are entrancing. That's why they're magnetic. Because they're oozing that awareness. However, we have to turn our attention to this body thing for a while to learn what to do with it. And we get lost on that journey and we forget. And so at some point in our life, we get to a stage where something seems like it's missing. Something's not quite there. We feel incomplete. We start looking for another half, our soulmate, to be whole. But actually, all that's required is the path of return, to merge that awareness that you had then with the dexterity and the agility with this body that you have now. And then it really is job done. Now, the reason I mention that is because it is such a significant thing to consider that when people have been aspiring to soul or higher awareness, that it's some distant ideal, some goal which only the super duper hut meditating gurus can achieve, and we may only scratch upon it if we can gain 5 minutes every Sunday evening. What a lot of twaddle. What a lot of rubbish. Human beings can emancipate and enlighten themselves in any situation, in any environment, because it's only about us matching those two things up. Our body dexterity with the awareness we had when we were born. Those two together is mission accomplished. And all paths of self-mastery, self-awareness, self-development are all about unlearning the crap that was taught to us and setting up good, positive, beneficial alignments within. So, the biggest missing piece of that puzzle is a signpost that will connect us to everything. So, the first word. What I'm going to suggest to you all today is that this puzzle is a journey that takes us from unity into duality. And that the first word is about the spell of never-ending good. Of good which has no end. And that for us humans, the very first word was the word gu. And that we would be going about the place going gu, 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 gu. And here we are now. We've gone through all of our physical exploration. We've penetrated the substance of the matter of this world to such an extent that we've got all these amazing comforts and accoutrements around us. We've explored our emotional diversity and depth to come to terms with the vast range of feelings and movements that we feel. We've explored the full gamut of our mind to the point that it's now running in circles. And everything's just repeating or being regurgitated. And what I'm suggesting to you now is that at the end of that journey, that the word gu is not only the first word, it is the last word. It is the alpha and the omega word. And it's because I'm suggesting to you right now that after all that exploration, that the word gu is still the best description for everything around and within us. So, I'll give you some examples. Cut me open. Pile of stuff falls out. Is gu an acceptable reference for that? If I've got a bowl of porridge or a bowl of soup or some nice spaghetti bolognese in front of me, is gu an acceptable word for that? If there's a big pile of horse manure outside, is gu an acceptable word for that? Bacteria in a petri dish. Fish swimming in the sea. Trees swaying in the breeze. Stars hanging pendant in the night sky. Has everybody seen these Hubble Space Telescope shots of nebula and star systems and incredible galaxies? What I'm suggesting to you is that what we live in and what we're made up of is a super organised, super intelligent, super aware goo substance. And that the molecular sea of physics, the biological soup, the primordial sea, it's all just goo. Now, the big difference between goo and God is that goo isn't a name. It's not a word in any language. It precedes language. It's our innate core sound. And because of that, it has a particular effect on our consciousness, and an effect on our awareness and on our alignment. Because this is presented as some distant thing, some distant remote thing. God created the universe out of something else. And then he stood and looked at it and said, it was good. That's the concept of God transcendent, that the divine is somehow outside and removed from its creation. What a lot of rubbish. That would then dismiss all the rest of the biblical teachings that actually is in all of us. It's a complete contradiction. The repointing of the signpost goo is about the divine immanent. Immanent. Here, now, right now, in you, in me, in this space, in this room, everywhere. Let's go back to that phrase. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with, and the Word was. You know that middle bit, the Word was with. I never got that as a kid. And I kept asking about it, and I kept giving it all these metaphorical answers. But I'll tell you exactly what it means now, accurately, and every one of you will be able to understand it, because of what we've already talked about, how words work. And that is, if I'm talking about a pen, there doesn't need to be a pen there. I can say pen, there's no pen. It's fine. The Word is not with the pen. Okay? The Word is not with the pen. Whereas you can never refer to that which is everything without it being there. Because it's everything. In fact, you can never utter. This should theoretically be applying to this word, but it doesn't. You can never utter the word goo without goo being the thing that is speaking, the medium that it's moving through, and the thing that's receiving it. And the Word was with. It's inseparable. In terms of a signpost, that's pretty good, because it means that the capacity to align is there all the time. And I invite you to consider that actually, goo consciousness is the correct way of thinking about God consciousness. Because it was goo consciousness you had as an infant. You were in the primordial goo. You were making your way through it. You were in that undifferentiated state, and everything was a swimming sea of energy. Goo consciousness. And the moments you touch on, and your high states of meditation, lovemaking, dance, and all the rest of it, these are attainable to you all the time, if we can get the mind aligned. Because this is the thing that stops us from feeling it. Because what are we doing when we're meditating, lovemaking, dancing? We're not thinking about it. We're allowing ourselves to have the experience. If we can align our mind to then be able to carry those feelings the rest of the time, then hey, wouldn't we be a lot happier? Of course you would. This is the point about the first word. It is the word of liberation. It is the word of emancipation. It is the word of ultimate empowerment. Because you are goo. Now, I want you to think about the evolution on this planet. There's an interesting thing about etymology and all the rest of it. People always raise the fact, well, isn't God just a word in a language called English and all the rest of it? Yes, that's all true. And actually, prophecy has been about this word because, you know, the whole idea of the number of his name, people have heard about that, the number of his name, the whole 3 score, 6 and 6, all the rest of it. Well, actually, it's referring to spelling. Because actually, this word is 66.6% recurring correct. It's 2/3 correct. Do you think John, when he was having his prophetic visions, knew what a decimal point was? Do you think he knew what a recurring symbol was? Do you think he knew what a percent sign was? No, he didn't. And what I'm suggesting to you is that the journey and the story of the last few thousand years has been the journey of the goos and the de-evil, where the effect of us having ending sounds and misunderstanding in our concept for all that is devastating to us. It makes us so ill. So ill, because it makes us believe we're separate. It's the worst possible crime. Now, let me just get rid of that for a second. Yeah, so, goo, signpost. Oh yes, so to get this concept of goo across, because we've got to think about the fact that the problem we're up against is the fact that our mind is over-masculinized, because it's overly looking at the detail of things. So as you look around here, you don't see me as a whole. You see my hair, my beard, my eyes, my nose, my hands, my arms, my torso, my shirt, all these things. You don't see me as a whole being. Most of the people in this room, it will be impossible for you to switch off that identification of looking at components. We don't see things as a whole anymore, which is our feminine perception. Now, millions of years ago, this planetary dream was one where it couldn't dream forth very complex things. Its goo was kind of, a bit kind of rough and ready. So that was where we had invertebrates. So, slugs, snails, scorpions, jellyfish, things like that. They are all semi-organised goo. Cut with a slug, pile of goo sitting there. Where's the belly? No idea. Couldn't tell yet. Where's the brain? No idea. It's just all goo in there. However, as the planet developed and as it evolved in itself, it was able to dream forth more complex life forms until it got to the ultimate. It could dream forth a life form complex enough to manifest divine awareness. But there's some problems when you start to dream forth vessels which can carry that kind of energy. And that's the problems of our species. But what we've lost in the sight of that, with our highlighting of all the detail, is that where we are now, where we are vertebrates, is that it's no different. We are just super-organised goo substance. That's why we call them organs. Because they're organised. They're still just goo. They have different functions, all the rest of it. Now the thing is, I'm doing this bit, this is the serious goo talk. But actually, goo is extremely comical, liberating and amusing. Because it should be. Because the whole God thing and the devil thing carries with it such a performance demand. There's a performance demand in there. There's a measurement, there's a stick and a carrot. That's not reality. How do you start a war in the name of goo? You can't. Because everything around you is goo. When you have that word, you cannot engage in any of the practices people have engaged in the name of God. Because it would be the ultimate disrespect. How could I harm another goo? It's like, well, we're equal. You're like me. We're one and the same. Now, it's a tricky one for the mind to grasp, the whole goo thing, because the concept of God is the cornerstone of reality. Have you ever heard that any people at traditional religious upbringing hear that term, the cornerstone? I didn't, never knew what it meant. Now, the reason it's a cornerstone is because this is the biggest concept we've got. It's the only thing that stops our mind going blah, 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 when it thinks about infinity, when it thinks about creation, when it thinks about how everything is packaged together. Because we can't think bigger than universes. We can't conceive of what's before creation. So this is our safety net. That's the cornerstone. Everything else is built around it. It's all hinged on it. Changing collar cuffs tie as a signpost, that's easy. Just show you, you're like, wow, there it is. None of you will ever view those symbols in the same way again. This is a much trickier one, because it's the absolute root of our society's psychology. Even if you yourself did not have a traditional religious upbringing, the state you live in is built on it. The laws you're up against are built on it. So it's there whether you like it or not. And no matter how much you think it hasn't affected you, it has. Because all the conditioning that was placed upon you was based on these. Extremely powerful stuff. Now, what I like about, to give you more of the levity side, because I'm feeling this sort of deafening silence growing in the room, which is okay, because that's normal at this particular talk, but I want you to think about the fact that, this God thing has such a performance thing associated with it, where it's like, yes, we're these civilized, evolved God beings. God is manifest in me. Fabulous. Because there's massive ego associated with the character of the demon, the serpent eating its own tail. Now, with goo, it's great, because every single person here is a beautiful manifestation of super evolved goo. Doesn't matter what size you are, doesn't matter how you look, doesn't matter how many teeth are in your mouth, it's irrelevant. It's all beautiful goo. Now, with God, there's no tolerance. I mean, if somebody let off a tremendously loud fart in the back of the room right now, some people would be like, does he know we're in public? There might be some laughter in the room and things like that. There'll be all these sorts of different responses. Whereas, we are a bit bumbling. We are a bit comical. How many of us here have given ourselves trapped wind because of holding a fart in a group? That's not very comfortable, is it? Why do we do that to ourselves? Because of this performance bond. Those free men amongst you, the performance aspect of it. Whereas in goo, we are a bit bumbling, we are a bit comical, we trip up, we fall over, we burp, we fall, we make silly noises. We all produce brown stuff at the end of the day in the toilet. This is the levelling of the playing field. Because it doesn't matter what you're wearing, it doesn't matter what you look like. Excuse me, if I tear it all apart, ha ha ha, you're made of a pile of goo like I am. All the performance stuff is annihilated. The other thing it does is it eliminates hierarchy. There's no hierarchy in goo. There is a shoulder-to-shoulder responsibility. We don't stand above the animals who are above the plants, but we're below the planet and it's below the sun and blah blah blah. That's a nonsense man-made hierarchy that isn't founded in any fact. The reality is we are shoulder to shoulder with all of those as manifestations of goo responding to its own needs. Something goes wrong in your body, it does something to respond to it, doesn't it? If you get an illness, then out come the antibodies and off they go. Brilliant. We are all dreamt forth responses to the need of those who came before us. That's some pretty powerful thinking there. Because in our efforts goo is a massive, massive, massive subject. I could be here talking to you about it for weeks. And we could be doing workshops on it for weeks, and it would still take you a long time to integrate it. But what I invite you to consider is that with the consideration of goo consciousness, and that if indeed goo is here and amongst us, and actually the air molecules are moving between us, and the breeze that you feel in your face is in fact goo, and in actual fact that this goo substance that you live in has taken a personal interest in you for your whole life. And we've all wandered around going, where's the bloody God thing? Man, like shit, or whatever. Whereas really, even when you've been thinking it's at the absolute worst, when you're lying in bed at night with a lovely gooey duvet, with a lovely gooey cup of cocoa, it's just you and your goo that's there. And you're being looked after. Your needs are being met, even though you may not think it. And it's our own resistance that prevents the benevolence of goo reaching us. And I want you to consider the fact that every single thing is this goo substance that carries with it divine awareness and presence. It's up to us to align with that and work with it. And that's when magic starts to happen. Now, I want you to think about times in your life where something has just caught your attention. It might have been a leaflet, might have been a little ad in a newspaper, and then you followed that thread, and off you've gone with that like, oh, what's this? Curious, something new. And you meet lots of nice people, you might even meet a new partner, you might then change, your whole life could change just from the corner of a piece of paper that caught your attention. How do you think it caught your attention? Because attention is attention. T-E-N-S-I-O-N. It is attention. It's created. All of our addictions, whenever we focus or relate to something, attention is created. If you want to understand it, the easiest way of thinking about it is something that you really like and are a bit partial to. Some of you it might be coffee, some of you it might be chocolate, some of you it might be, tobacco, some of you it might be a nice pint.
Breathing.
Breathing's a good one, but really you can't really do without that one. But in terms of thinking, if one of your indulgences was before you, I'm a bit partial to that. That's that tension. It's attention, it's palpable. So attention is created. Now, I forgot why I was going on about attention now. What was I on about before that? I want to deviate on particular words that are really interesting. Test of attention, people. What was I talking about before I talked about attention?
Something that catches our awareness.
Thank you, brilliant. So how does that tension get created? This is good. working in your life, personally, to guide you to exactly the spaces you need, to have just the right connections, even though they may be just fleeting, for you to just get those right little realizations. And if you think that that guidance, that patience, that kind of measured introduction of knowing and contact to guide you on your journey is being managed personally, not just for you and me and everybody in this room and every other human being on the planet, but for every animal, for every plant, for every planet, for every solar system, that is astonishing.
Thank God for that.
It's incredible, absolutely, because all it leaves us with is incredible awe, incredible respect at the absolute, incredible, stupendous magnificence of it all, because it really is. If you imagine all these forces, so, switch your modes of visualization in your mind, perceive everything as energy if you like, perceive it as light if you like, perceive it as a gooey substance if you like, doesn't matter how you picture it. But to imagine all those forces being balanced and maintained and all flowing right to where they need to be, I'm sorry, that is an absolute work of incredible magic. It really is. And this is where the reverence has to be associated with our reference of Guru. Because the reverence is one of the most beautiful things. Amazing grace. Because indeed it is. It's an incredible thing. And I suppose as we are moving to a close tonight, the only thing I can really do is invite you to let that sink in. Because there's nothing else I can do when I'm trying to shift the cornerstone signpost. All I can do is levy a few kicks like this and then go, oh, that worked. Because other than that, it's up to you to do all the remapping, emotionally, mentally, physically, to create that alignment. And all I can do at talks like this is highlight a doorway. I can't show you the fruits. All I can say is, what we've done is we've looked at Goo tonight from one point of view. There are actually many, many approaches to Goo because it really is the signpost for everything. It's quite simple. It's both the most simple thing in the world and the most complex thing in the world at the same time. Because it is both the ultimate in simplicity, but it's manifest in absolutely stupendous complexity. So, as we move to a close, I invite you to consider what that it may mean to you as it sinks in over time. To realise that you are the manifest purpose of the divine. You are a divinely mandated, super-organised goo substance that has incredible capacities of alignment, power and awareness at your very fingertips. No less and no more than anybody else. That is astonishing. Because the greatest thing that is missing from most people, like I mentioned at the beginning, is a sense of value and a sense of worth in you, in your role and what you have to bring. Because I'll tell you what, the only place it's doubted is in the minds of humanity. The rest of the universe reveres and applauds your presence. And it's simply waiting. That goo substance that surrounds us is simply waiting for us to realise that we are made of the same stuff as it, and come on, let's get on with it. This isn't waiting around with popcorn for 2012 to arrive and either the new saviors of the aliens to come and bail us out or for something magical to happen to get rid of all the bad people. That's not it. I can't remember who the quote is, but it's a fabulous quote that goes, the only thing that is required for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. So all the state has to do is to, or the establishment has to do, is to trick you into thinking that your efforts are futile. It's to trick you into thinking that your contribution isn't worth much. If they can do that, it's job done for them. Job done. Because once you start to awaken and once you start to get a sense of your value, it is an unstoppable process. It's unstoppable for you to align with your soul. It's unstoppable. It's absolute, and this is throughout all spiritual texts as well. Once those steps began to be taken, that's it. Because you all of a sudden started to align with what your soul wanted you to be doing all along in the first place. And right now, the energies are at their best for every single one of us to actually achieve. We've never been in such a position as this. It's incredible. But the demand that's being made of us is to act on what you know. All of us have been sitting on knowledge for many years, sitting in our comfort zones, perhaps to do with feelings of worth, value, what's the point, can't make a difference, things like that. I'll tell you what, goo disagrees, the universe disagrees, the substance of your very environment disagrees, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's that simple. And I suppose all I can do is invite you to maybe move to embrace that in tandem with everything else, because I can't think of anything better than, even if, it's not about attaining enlightenment and escapism or anything like that, but as long as you feel good about who and what you are, that you feel loved, and that, you feel valued, it doesn't matter. There could be nobody in this room. It doesn't matter, because it's just you and the goo that's here, and if you can feel that, then that's it. The whole universe is buzzing because of the ripples in the pond effect. All of us sitting here moping about, I'm sure I've got nothing to offer, blah, blah, blah. That's like a really painful ick in the back of the universal goo. It's like, oh, what's this kick that's here? Oh, that's hurting. That's because we're sitting there hurting. We're sitting there abusing ourselves as part of that universal whole. And we need to snap out of it. Because the Saviour isn't some outside force that's going to come and bail you out and, like I say, kick the bad guys out. It's within you. It's that incredible, dexterous, agile soul that's in you, that worked out what to do with this body, that worked out how to make it speak, that worked out how to make it go along, that worked out how to get through all of the situations that you have in your life to then end up here today. That's an incredible accomplishment. Well done to you all. But we're not through the woods yet. But we are almost there. And so I invite you all to feel a sense of re-inspiration that we are actually at the last hurdles. And really, all of the stuff that's going on around us is the flailing of a dying beast. It's flapping and it's flailing and it's dying, and its teeth and its claws are lashing out and trying to get us. And at the moment, most of us stand in its grip, so we get hit by it. But with a little bit of awareness and a little bit of work, which all of you have already begun, you can start to move away from the effects of its claws and say, oh yeah, I see what's happening. And you can get to the stage where your internal state is unaffected by what others are doing. Now that's when you're moving towards inner peace. That's when you're moving towards self-mastery, the mastery of your internal state, because then you can take on anything. And I would invite you to consider a rock in the sea. And if you've got a porous piece of sandstone, that porous piece of sandstone will be washed away in a few years. But if you've got a piece of granite in there, that'll take all the blows of all the waves for a very, very long time. And that's the difference between a human being that stands in doubt of who and what they are, and a human being that knows exactly what they are. Most of us start off life as porous rocks, as leaves in the wind, and we get blown about, we get battered, and we get worn down. But we don't realise that at any point, that soul consciousness, that capacity, that freshness, that wonder that you were born with is still there. In the same places where you remember how to look at what licking a carpet tastes like. Still in the same place. So I invite you to, enjoy your journey in the path of return, embrace it, celebrate it. But I want to do is, before I wrap up on that, I want to just finish off with one more bit about you, because I am conscious of the time, even though I can't actually see the clock. What time is it? Is that 10?
10:30.
It's 10:30. Whoa, okay, we are going to wrap up. There we go. Okay. So, one last thing I want to do is I want to talk about what I believe is the most powerful symbol that is presented to us in terms of the ones that are laughing at us. So you've got symbols like the Illuminati torch, things like that. They're minor. The most significant one of them all is this. Of course, this is just my opinion. The G in the set, square and compass. I've not done it very well there, but I've done it to portray what they are. Has everybody seen that symbol? Yeah? Okay. That's it in a nutshell. Now, what we've been talking about in words tonight is actually just the beginning. So the whole point about Goo and looking at his word, that's just the beginning. It then goes somewhere else. And it's all about this side of it in terms of how words work at a geometric level, is that it is about geometry, and it's about the mind and maths and all this sort of stuff. When you talk about degrees, it's actually about degrees of awareness. As we move to becoming upright beings, we become upstanding. And this, I don't have time to go into tonight, but really, all characters are shapes first, and we interpret them depending on their context. Yeah. So this could be anything. Could be the moon, could be the sun, could be a hat, could be a hole, could be a zero, could be a knot, it's an O, whatever. But we know what it is as soon as I give it a relationship. All of a sudden you know it's a circle. All of a sudden you know it's a 0. All of a sudden you know it's an O. How you process numbers, shapes and letters is completely different. It's the same shapes. Now, the thing is, there's certain special shapes that have a profound meaning. And obviously, this is one of them. This is another one of them. This is why they are characters in the word. But I want you to look at these as shapes for a minute. And I'm just going to quickly summarise that this is about form, this is about substance. And this is about the atoms and structure, because it's clearly defined what is on the inside and what is on the outside of a circle, correct? You know, fine well. But if we look at this shape, it's not clearly defined what's inside and what's outside, is it? This is like the chi. That's why the G and the chi are similar in sound for a reason. This is about the life force that permeates us all. It's about the spirit aspect or the father aspect. And the interesting thing about the G is that it is the heart of every spiral. And it's about the perfect balance of male and female energies in the universe. And that's why spirals are everywhere in nature. Everywhere. All over the place. Water, air, space, land, everywhere. This is about the way in and the way out. It's about the father aspect, the higher aspect. We need to go a bit more into good and medieval and stuff like that to get into the real nitty-gritty of it. But it's all about the way in and the way out. And it's about our spirit aspect. This symbolises the trapping of the spirit of man. They've trapped us in their buildings. To set square and compass. It doesn't matter how moved and motivated you get about anything else. If they've trapped your spirit, if they've made you feel worthless and valueless, then they've won. It doesn't matter how much you improve your diet. It doesn't matter how much you go and not get vaccinated. Until you find that divine power that is within you, we're not going to turn the flow. Now, the great thing is that it's not a button that gets switched on and off. It's a process. And all of you are already along that process. Your growing feelings of empowerment, awakening and all the rest of it are part of that process. But what I'm trying to do tonight is show you how high that goes and how most of this stuff that's telling you about the truth and where the control comes from and all the rest of it, it's all barking, not up the wrong tree, but it's all barking around within the walls and the ceiling. Whereas really what I'm trying to get you to look at is have a peek outside the walls. Have a peek above the ceiling. Because that's where it all starts to fall apart. And then when it falls apart, which is great, the mind can then integrate. So, I always struggle when I'm trying to wrap up a good talk, because I could talk about it for weeks. So instead, I suppose, all I can really do is invite you to digest, mentally digest what's been presented tonight, because there's a lot that we've covered, and it's not a small subject. And I suppose I'll return to where I started, and that is that in all of the information overload that we're surrounded by, in terms of what's important and what's relevant, what I'm trying to suggest to you tonight, that what we've covered tonight is actually very important and very relevant. And I can only make that as a suggestion for something to consider. I certainly can't stand here and dictate what the word from the beginning is, or what the very, very first human word is. But because I believe that it is innate, I am making you a suggestion. I am inviting you to consider. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you, you didn't answer that. It's something to go away with, to mull over. Because if it makes sense, then that's just the beginning. This is an invitation. All I'm doing is pointing out this completely, in terms of, I always talk about, so the reason I don't really write about this stuff is because it's very difficult to write about, and how to break down words. It's like trying to hit a stick with itself. So, you can't really break words up that way. I'm very much about the power of the oral tradition, what I call the living word, which is about where the human vehicle is the best possible tool for opening human minds. Because we can use all sorts of powerful things that this multi-dimensional vessel can do that penmanship never can. Okay? It's not about reading books. It really isn't. It's about the living experience. So anyway, on that note, thank you It seems terrible to just abruptly end it like that, but I am going to say thank you very, very much for your attention. I'm going to wrap up by saying that I do have a few websites. There's www.alternativeanswers.net, which is just my general blog. It's, I'll write it on the board for folks. So there's alternativeanswers.net. There's also, for those of you that are interested in free management software and stuff, I have my own branch of that, which is very different to other people's. And you can find out about that on www.peoplespublictrust.com. And the final one is .com. And then the final one, which has only just gone up, so there's not a lot of substance on it, but it's goo.is. But that will grow over time. In terms of recapturing and reconnecting with your good consciousness, this is what all my events are about. So I do sound work, which is all about us creating alignments and substance. I do work on helping us repoint all these mental signposts and understand the art of spelling so we can reuse our mind in new ways. I do events on perception, so you can start to break down the view of the world that we have, to recapture that view that we had as infants. And the work on gender is about us healing our relationships in our community and about communication. So if anybody has an interest in any of those, I have a mailing list, or you can just get in touch with me through one of the websites. I think there's contact pages on them all. I'm not like some kind of fire and forget missile that's in here just to mess with your head and run away laughing. So if any of you do have any questions about any of this tonight, I am open to helping clarify it for you, because my point is to try and make a point, to try and get you to see the point. And if you're struggling with that, then you know, get in touch. And finally, I'll get your question in just a second, sir. I have if anybody is interested, as a bit of a mnemonic, I've got some GUI's booklets, which covers a lot of what we did tonight, but also there's some other bits and bobs in there just to help you remember. These are £3 if you're working, 2 if you're not. And if you can't afford that, then get in touch. It's all designed to be affordable. If you'd like to donate more, you'd be very welcome. It would all go to. It'll all actually go to the work of the People's Public Trust, which is actually about fixing the public service and taking on public servants basically who have abused their authority. And we've got our first cases going through in the next few weeks, so that's something that may interest some of you. Totally different from GU, obviously, but related. And the last thing of all is I have, for those of you that are interested in a bit more in sound and language and things like that, I have my Sounds for the Soul booklet and CD, which is an instructional booklet about how to get your mind aligned with certain practices like meditation and sound work. And then there's a guided meditation on there and some sound work and bits and bobs. Please feel free to come and browse them. I'll put them on the table there. These are £15 if you're working, 10 if you're not. Like I say, please do come and have a look. I invite you all in the future just to observe. That's the point. I'm not here to dictate. Just observe these things. So, thank you all very much for your time and your attention. Cheers.